Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. Today is the 25th of January 2022, and these are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the latest tensions that escalate Ukraine at the adjoining region. As, of course, NATO has sent reinforcements, the US has put troops on alert, around 8,500. Ships are also being sent, fighter jets are being sent to Eastern Europe. Is this the beginning of another war in Europe? Does Europe afford, can Europe afford such a war? And is really Russia aiming for an incursion into Ukraine? This is going to be our first segment. It's a very important one because the tensions are rising with every passing day. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns human rights in Pakistan and, of course, the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022 that was drafted by the Ministry of Human Rights with extensive inputs by the lawyers and the women rights groups, has finally been passed, has been made into law, is now part of our constitution. We'll be talking to the Minister for Human Rights, Dr. Shireen Mazari, about the importance of this law and its application. Let's begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the very first segment, and our first segment concerns the tensions that are escalating in Ukraine, also the tensions between Russia and NATO, the tensions between Russia and the United States of America, and the collaboration between the United States and Europe as far as sending troops into Ukraine is concerned. More in the following report.
The potentially dangerous escalation in the crisis between Russia and Western powers is sparking fear of full-blown war in Europe. The rising tensions have reignited the debate that what will be the consequences of an all-out conflict between nuclear giants. Indicating mounting tensions, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned that NATO would take all necessary measures and mentioned that NATO is putting forces on standby and reinforcing Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets. According to media reports, Russia is massing an estimated 100,000 troops in the reach of Ukrainian border and denied any plan to invade Ukraine. EU foreign ministers meeting in Brussels warned Russia that it would face massive consequences for invading Ukraine. Though there are diplomatic options, but crisis talks aimed at averting a military confrontation between Russia and Ukraine appear to be faltering. Russia has been persuading the West to bar Ukraine from joining NATO and roll back decades of alliance expansion in Europe. Western powers termed Moscow's demand as maximalist and reiterated that Kremlin's call to veto Ukrainian membership and halt NATO military activity in Eastern Europe are non-starters, but that it is willing to talk about the arms control, missile deployment, and confidence-building measures. As in all conflicts with roots in the Cold War and its aftermath, it is yet to be ascertained how the world's two largest nuclear-armed states manage their arsenals and use them for leverage in current standoff over Ukraine.
Dr. Farah Naz, who is an assistant professor at NUS, joins us online to talk more about this very important topic. Dr. Saiba, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saiba, with every passing day, there seems to be an increase in tension as far as Ukraine, Russia, and of course, Russia, NATO, Russia, US relations are concerned. Why is all of this happening when Russia is denying with every passing day that it does not want to invade Ukraine? What is then putting the US and Europe and NATO into high alert?
If you look at the historical figures, it shows that Ukraine has always remained a very important country for Tsarist Russia, for the Ottoman Empire, for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and for the Poland. So we cannot deny the significant position and geostrategic position of Ukraine. In the current scenario, we could see that America and all the entire European states and UK, they're getting very touchy about the Ukrainian crisis and especially the Russian troops getting stationed on the border. But here we could see, dual sort of messages coming up. One is that at one side, Russia is stationing its troops on the border, but America is also, putting its troops on high alert. And according to the Pentagon spokesperson, they have stationed and alerted around 8,500 troops stationed there to counter if the Russia is going to have any attacks on the Ukraine. So the tensions, I repeatedly say, they are very serious and severe. And according to the defense minister of Ukraine, they say that it's not only about the east of the Ukraine, it's about the east of the entire European Union. So if we pay attention to the population statistics and all, European Union has more than 700 million people there. So the life of all people who is living there in those 27 countries in European Union, they are really at a target, and they are really becoming one of the major affectees of this entire crisis.
All
And
right, Dr. Farah,
the game.
when we speak of the 8,500 US troops that have been put on alert, also NATO that has sent about 4,000 troops in battalions in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland, backed by tanks, air defense, and intelligence and surveillance units. Is the West getting ready even before Russia is, as far as an escalation or maybe violence or aggression in Ukraine is concerned? Who will cast the first stone as far as this whole tension is concerned, if it comes to violence or an incursion?
Yeah, looks like I think yesterday's meeting of President Biden, UK, France, Italy, and European and the NATO forces. I think they themselves are pushing Russia to take certain actions, and they are in some of their disclaimers. It is coming out that probably Russia may go for a flagship operation. So why are in this tense situation such kind of statements are coming from these powerful states, where at one side they say that they want to have diplomatic ties and they want to resolve the issue on diplomatic fronts, but on the other side they are really stationing and getting prepared for potential conflict. So if they take one step, of course Russia will take two more steps, and this is how things are really working.
All right,
So
Dr. Farahnaaz, in
I would
whose
say,
interest, in your point of view, is this conflict, if it escalates further? Is it in the Russian interest, or is it in the US or NATO's interests? What's your take on that?
I think it's a very tricky question because Russia has always considered Ukraine a part of it, because it remained in the history the breadbasket of Soviet Union. So it has a significant position. And if we look at some of the statistics, it is the biggest exporter of sunflower oil and is the fourth largest shipper of corn. And it delivered grains to nations from Morocco to Bangladesh and to Indonesia. So it has the potential of some sort of agriculture developments, and when we call it, it has its nickname, the breadbasket. So in that way, Russia will try its level best, not only for these reasons, but of course for the geostrategic position and significance of the Ukraine and its border. It will not let it go to the NATO control. And the only problem that is emerging in terms of Russia is the NATO expansion to the eastern side of it. If they don't go for the expansion, I think the issue will not escalate. But here, the Western forces, and led by America, of course, at its back, and UK, they are not understanding the nitty-gritty of the situation, that due to their own interest of getting control of Ukraine and getting closer to the Moscow, and getting stationed with the border line there, they are really threatening the lives of the entire EU 27 countries. So they have no right, to put the life of all those people in danger. And we have seen war situations in these countries in the past. We have seen in the World War II, in World War I, and in the Cold War era as well. Why are they putting the lives of all these people in danger one more time? And since we know that Russia is a nuclear power state, and I'm not saying that America is not a nuclear power state. They are also a nuclear power state. But the thing is that this issue can easily be resolved through diplomatic terms. And Germany is playing a very important role here, where it is trying to resolve the issue through peaceful and diplomatic terms. But how influential Berlin and
You
German
talk of interventions, Dr. Farahnaaz. I'd like to point out on what the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to say. He told very recently broadcasters that intelligence was pretty gloomy at this point, but that sense can still prevail. Can sense prevail, whether it be from the Western side or from the Russian side? What do you feel could happen? Where is the whole balance tilting?
I think the whole balance is tending towards the way the European Union and the NATO countries, they play their due role there. If they keep expanding, so of course Russia will react to their expansionism, because to Russia it is completely not acceptable. And I think it could be to any other sovereign state whose sovereignty is getting under question, that if the Western forces, and the area that really is considered. If we take example of Taiwan, if we take example of Kashmir, and if we take example of all those regions which are conflict zones, and suddenly if the other party who is really in conflict with you, they try to station their troops there. So of course there will be an action and reaction phenomena. No matter we call it a poker or a chess game, the other party will respond back. So it's more in this situation, it's more like a triggering point that who
You talk
can
of
trigger
triggering,
the
Dr.
war.
Farah. I'd like to understand what you feel as far as the stationing of the 100,000 troops on the border by Russia is concerned. It says it's having military drills with Belarus. How much of that, in your point of view, is true? How much in your point of that is pressurizing Ukraine one way or the other?
It's more a deterrent strategy that if you dare to come closer to the border region, which is a conflict zone, I will react to it. I don't see that the stationing of 100,000 troops is for only military exercises. No, it is for to deter its enemies, and it could be NATO and it could be America on the other side. But it's what is in the best interest of Ukraine. I think that is very important at this stage. Whether Ukraine can become a target of a serious conflict between America and Russia, I think there are several problems happening within Ukraine that could potentially lead towards a conflict, and that is the rising inflation, and they are having a rise in the energy crisis, and the treason and corruption is at peak. And of course, there is some kind of tilt within the parliamentarians sitting in Ukraine towards Russia. So 10% is clearly towards pro-Russia. So their policies are a bit shaky. Ukraine, I'm speaking about it. Their policies are a bit shaky. They are not getting a clear answer whom to side with, because on one side is the NATO, it's the EU, it's America. On the other side is Russia, with whom they have closer cultural, socio-economic ties, and Ukraine was once a part of it.
All
So
right.
it's harder for them to understand whom to side with and what to do. But
All
the
right, Dr.
situation is
Farah, if
really
it's harder
serious.
for Ukraine to decide, why is Russia having an issue with Ukraine being part of NATO? Because this is one of the strong tension points between NATO and Russia. Why does Russia have these apprehensions in your point of view?
Yeah, it will. The whole issue I mentioned earlier as well, the whole issue is about the NATO expansion towards the eastern side. And it is believed from the Russian perspective that if they get closer to the to the eastern side of Ukraine, that will give them access to it will provide them access to get closer to Moscow and to the Russian border. So, and that particular area is under conflict. So I gave you an example of Kashmir, I gave you an example of Taiwan. These issues, I think, are really serious to Russia. So if they want to get closer to those conflict zones, it should be through mutual consent and through diplomatic and peaceful means. If they try to play games like a chess and poker, it will not serve the purpose because the other party will react to it. This is what Russia is doing. And it's showcase of muscles. It's a showcase of, if you try to come closer to my border, I have not only the capability, but I do have the strength as well. And that strength is through the military power and the nuclear capability, that if you try to come closer, I will react to it. And the exercises, the joint exercises that Russia is having in the Black Sea, showcase that they have all the power to deter its enemy, that if you dare to come closer to my border zone, I will react to it with force. So it's muscles that is shown on both sides.
All
But
right.
Ukraine is in a very tricky situation. Because it is weaker from inside, and then there is foreign intervention as well. And it is very important not only to Russia, but to the entire European Union as well, because it
All right.
borders with all. So if there
Of
is
course, it's
any
going to create a
conflict in
huge
Ukraine,
hurdle as far as the geostrategic positioning of the
yeah.
whole world is concerned. And the tilt is going to go at one end of the spectrum. Now, Dr.
Yeah.
Farnaz, my last question to you is how is all of this going to impact global politics and, of course, global economics? Because if I remember well, Joe Biden, when he was addressing the media some time back, a couple of days back, he said if it's a small incursion and he did refer to that there will be a small price to pay, but if the incursion is large, then of course Russia will have to pay a huge price. This is what the British Prime Minister also that said, that Russia will have a painful, violent and bloody business to be dealing with if it invades Ukraine. What's going to happen? What is the scenario that you foresee?
Yeah, I think whatever the comments came from Boris Johnson, they were very strong, and he was very clear on that they are really not interested in knowing that Russia is going to invade Ukraine, and they have prepared a heavy package of sanctions to be imposed upon Russia if Russia take any step towards attacking or invading Ukraine. But when the Germans, they were trying to block the SWIFT access, I think they were unable to do so because it will lead towards huge financial crisis in the entire system. So the geopolitics and the geoeconomics is also going to be a factor with that. And at the same time, it's not only the economy which is going to be affected in terms of economic terms, but the refugee influx. If the conflict break out, the refugees, they're going to flow towards European Union and to all those countries, UK and USA as well. They will be approaching them that this is what is happening because of you. So will European Union and all those states involved in this conflict will be able to bear the consequences of refugees flowing to their states? So it will have a direct impact on their financial circumstances, which probably I think all these states are not prepared with, because there is a lot of stuff happening across the world where refugees are really struggling to get adjusted. And when there was the Afghanistan situation, I think the European Union, they were really reluctant to accept refugees from Afghanistan. So will they accept something coming out of Ukraine to the number of refugees to flow to all those states? I think it's really going to be towards serious consequences for all the states involved here. The only solution is through diplomatic and peaceful means, which these states should really consider before providing such kind of strong statements coming from the powerful states and the powerful leaders across the world, like President Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, and from the EU itself. I think they have to show some sort of courtesy towards the more than 700 million population there in European Union. So they should not waste their lives altogether.
All right. Dr. Saiba, I'll refer to one or two more questions to you. First of all, Russia is saying that it's the West, not Russia, that is escalating tensions. On the same side, we see also the Britishers who are removing staff from their embassy in Kiev. Do you feel that even if Russia, I mean, let's kind of think of one of the scenarios, even if Russia does not invade Ukraine, but the West goes forward and kind of invades or tries to incur some kind of a violent scenario as far as the region is concerned, what do you think is going to happen? Because Russia from day one, on the one hand, we've had US that has been saying from day one that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Ukraine has also been saying that. Russia, on the other hand, from day one has been denying all of that. Who is telling the truth and who is being diplomatic and who is lying in your point of view?
It's very challenging to say that who is lying and who is really giving the true picture, because it is geopolitics and it is very hard to understand. But on the face of it, it looks like that, as I mentioned, that the sort of statements that are coming out from all these powerful states, I think they have to be careful with the language, with the terms that they use, that is going towards bloodshed and bloody business. And these are really, really strong sort of comments. So I think Russia is playing very diplomatically in this entire game, because nothing very violent and something really absurd is coming from the Russian side, except for that if they take one step, the Western side, if they take one step, Russia is taking two steps. And I think that is in the best interest of all states whose sovereignty and integrity is questioned. They will be doing it that way. But the issue is not only the 40 million population of Ukraine. The issue is the entire population of EU and the borders which are shared with the Ukraine.
Let's hope better sense prevails, Dr. Farah, and let's hope that some kind of a solution apart from something that involves the military comes into place, and that both sides come to some kind of a logical conclusion as far as this huge escalation is concerned, because it is troubling not only the Europeans, it's not only troubling the Americans or the Russians, it's troubling the entire world. If a small incursion happens in one place which involves so many different important members of the global community, it's going to have a very strong reaction from other parts of the globe, as you very well said. Thank you very much, Dr. Farah Naz, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this very, very important issue that is changing, a scenario that is changing with every passing day. And with every passing day, the situation is not getting any better. So let's hope that Russia and the US, or Russia and NATO, come to some kind of a conclusion, some kind of a settlement as far as this issue is concerned. Let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns human rights in Pakistan. Now, the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022 that had been drafted by the Ministry of Human Rights with input from the women's rights activists and lawyers has now been made part of the law. It has been signed by the President. It is a very important achievement for the Ministry of Human Rights. How important is it for Pakistan, for the women, for all the other segments of the society? More in the following report.
Harassment is rooted in gender-based discrimination and creates an abusive, hostile work environment for women. Marking a commendable step, Pakistan's parliament has passed the Protection Against Harassment of Women at Workplace bill, which was enacted on January the 14th. Building on the principle of equal opportunity for men and women and their right to earn a livelihood without fear of discrimination as stipulated in the Constitution, this bill was drafted with extensive input from women rights groups and lawyers. Pakistan's previous workplace harassment law, the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act 2010, left much to be desired, particularly the restrictive definition of harassment. Because of the restrictive definition of harassment, the burden was placed on the complainants to prove the sexual intent of the perpetrator. After detailed deliberations, the scope of law has been expanded to universities, art studios, women participating in sports and working online, effectively covering various employment models. Signaling a monumental shift, the bill aims to amend the definitions provided in the Act, particularly those of complainant, employee, employer, harassment and workplace, to remove ambiguities that litigants have faced. Workplace harassment unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance by creating an intimidating, offensive working environment, and to ensure participation of women in all spheres. These encouraging amendments spark new hope.
Now, to discuss this Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022, that was of course drafted by the Ministry of Human Rights in Pakistan. We've been joined by the Minister of Human Rights in Pakistan, Dr. Shireen Mazari. Thank you very much, Dr. Saiba, to have joined us. First of all, let's talk a little bit about this very important law, ma'am. Does this law cover just the female gender, that is the women, or are other genders and other segments of the society also covered?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The amendments are specifically for the law that exists on harassment of women at the workplace. So clearly, because the main body of the law is for women, so the amendments also relate to women.
All right, ma'am. The key loopholes in this 2010 workplace harassment law, which were being addressed in the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022, have that been properly addressed?
One of the main problems with the original law was that the workplace was defined in a very narrow, traditional manner. As we have seen women work now in different environments, the traditional workplace of an office 9-to-5 job is not the only place. There are TV studios, there are women who work from the home, there are domestic workers. For domestic workers especially, the workplace is the house in which they work. So, and there are a number of lacunas. The Supreme Court in a recent decision had in fact pointed this out, that they could not give relief to a woman on harassment because of the very narrow definition in the original law on workplace. So we have now expanded that definition.
All right, ma'am. Also, now a lot of people are talking about the ratification of the Harassment Convention C-190 of the ILO. Are there any possibilities that Pakistan might be ratifying it in the future?
I think the reference is being made to the ILO convention, which deals with harassment of workers, specifically women. I think our new law actually meets all the standards that any international convention has laid forth on preventing harassment of women at the workplace. And I think that this ILO convention will now be examined to see whether Pakistan is ready to sign and ratify it or not. But I can assure you that the new amendments now, the bill has become equivalent to any international standard that you may choose to compare it with.
Dr. Saiba, we were talking about this, of course, bill that has recently been made part of the law of Pakistan. Now, what protections have been offered to domestic workers who are at a greater risk of violence at the workplace?
The main issue was that domestic workers are never recognized as workers. This is one of the major issues. So we have now recognized domestic workers, women workers, as being part of the mainstream workforce, and therefore wherever they work, in homes or in private clubs or whatever, they are all going to be recognized as the workplace for that woman. So if that woman is harassed, the domestic worker is harassed in that situation, then she will have a right to redress, and those who have harassed her will be liable to punishment that the law offers.
All right. Dr. Saiba, also a lot of legal experts that I've talked to point out to the hurdles as far as the implementation or the application or the enforcement of this law is concerned. When will the enforcement process begin as far as this law is concerned?
The President has signed the amendments, and actually this particular law, even in its original form, was being enforced, and was being enforced quite effectively. The problem in this law was not so much enforcement, but the narrow scope of the law. So now the law has been expanded, taking into consideration the prevailing realities of workplaces and women working in different situations, and that law will be enforced because the amendments have been signed by the President, and we are just awaiting the Gazette notification.
Dr. Mazari, what is the mechanism of this amended bill that has been passed to end the harassment at the workplace without re-traumatizing the survivors?
The basically enforcement is through the ombudsperson, who and there's a specially appointed ombudsperson dealing with harassment of women. So they implement it, and the punishments are there. They enforce the punishments. And I think also now what we should look at is how to provide relief to victims through psychological support, through psychiatric treatment, provide them with a support base so that they're able to recover from the trauma they have suffered. Because there is, of course, the punishment of those committing the crime, violating the law, but there's also the victim there who needs to be looked at to see that she comes out of that trauma. So that is now where we will focus on.
Dr. Saiba, in your point of view, how can Pakistan secure a better place as far as the global human rights indexes are concerned? And what measures are crucial in your point of view to convey Pakistan's human rights initiatives to the international community?
We have signed 7 human rights conventions. We are implementing all of them. There are some gaps that we still have to fill by updating our laws. But since the PTI government came in, we have moved at a very fast pace towards improving the human rights situation in Pakistan. We have got our persons with disabilities law, we have got a senior citizen law, we have the Zainab Alert law, which deals with child abuse. We have set up our child protection centers. Now this harassment at the workplace law has been amended and its scope expanded. We have the journalist protection law now in place, and the rules are being made and it's being operationalized. So we have a number of laws that we have already passed, and some that we are in the process. They're in Parliament right now. The enforced disappearance, criminalizing of enforced disappearance is now has to be tabled in the Senate. The National Assembly has passed it. The torture bill is in the standing committee of the National Assembly. By the way, the corporal punishment law has also been now is there. It was passed. It's become a law. So if you look at the progress in the last 3.5 years of this government, we have moved very quickly and very far ahead in improving the human rights situation in Pakistan.
And finally, ma'am, how can one improve the efficiency of this redressal mechanism so as to grant speedy justice to all the victims of rights violations in Pakistan?
We have also now, in fact, the cabinet today approved the criminal law reforms in which, there are cases that get stuck for years and years. Now time frames have been devised for quick decisions by courts of cases. And we are also, we have a body, interministerial, interprovincial body, which I am in fact chairing, where we look at prison situations and we are moving towards prison reforms. We also have now a legal aid authority law. So we are able to provide legal aid and assistance to people who need and require it. And we all, this means a lot of poor people who have served their sentences but are unable to pay their fines and so on, we can enable them to get their we can pay their fines and get them relief. So there are a number of things that are happening to alleviate the suffering of the ordinary citizen, especially the marginalized women, transgenders. I didn't mention, but we have one of the most progressive transgender laws in the world, where transgenders are allowed to choose their identity, and our ID cards and our passports have a special identification for transgenders, which very few countries in the world have right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shireen Mazari Sahiba, who is the Minister for Human Rights, to have explained to us all the different laws that are in place for the different genders, including women, including the transgender community as well. And she talked about all the different laws that have been put into place and implemented by the current government, and with particular emphasis on the protection against harassment of women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022. Let's hope that Pakistan moves further in the right direction as far as the rights of all the different genders and communities are concerned, thanks to the Ministry of Human Rights. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. As we always end the show with, kindly keep yourself safe from the pandemic that is creating havoc across the world. Follow the SOPs and get yourselves vaccinated. See you tomorrow, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.